the topic, the theme of the conference is 21st century issues, methods, and trends in linguistics. And all the respectable speakers are speaking on the different issues and highlighting the modern trends and the contemporary trends in the linguistics. So following this approach, so I would also like to present a very sensitive and very important issue before you. So this is related to the cultural conceptualizations and cross-cultural conflicts. As you know that it is a very sensitive and a very important issue in today's global world, that there are so many conflicts and misunderstandings in the intercultural communication, and the cross-cultural conflicts, they are here, and the different cultures and the different societies, they're presenting their viewpoint of the world in a different way, and that's what we see, that the conflicts there are rising. So it's very important and significant in today's world to talk and discuss all these issues, so that we can promote tolerance, understanding, and uh, tolerance and understanding. So in this global world, so that's why I have chosen this topic of cultural conceptualization and cross-cultural conflict. So coming to the background of the cultural linguistics, because these issues, they are discussed in the cultural linguistics. So this is not something new. So because already so many great scholars, so they have been working on the area of the cultural linguistics, and interest in studying the relationship between language and culture can be traced back at least to the 18th century. Wilhelm Humboldt and Franz Boas, Edward Sapir, and Benjamin Whorf are prominent scholars who all emphasize the relationship between language, thought, and culture. So the issue and the topic, that how language that affects the culture and how language shapes up the reality, or what is the relationship between the culture and the thought and the language. So that's not something new, but already we know that uh, s- so many scholars in the history, we see that for the last um, more than 100 years, so the issue is being discussed in the various ways, with the various perspectives. So once again, so today we need to understand that what is the relationship of language and thought. And before this, so what are the different perceptions about language, or how we are defining the language? So what is language? So you know that the perception of language uh, have also been changed from time to time. We have traveled in shaping of our perception about the language. We see that language that range from language as cognition, as a system of cognition, to the language as faculty of mind. As a cognitive, so we started understanding the language as the cognitive system, or that's a faculty of mind. Now we have traveled to the concept that language as action, language as a social practice, language as a complex adaptive system. Mean to say that now the language role has improved from the individual mind to the collective minds to the society. And what is culture? Culture is the name of the cognitive system, as a symbolic system, as a social practice, or as a construct. So we can see that there is a great relationship between the language and the culture. Uh, Before starting or understanding the intercultural conflict, or the concept of the cultural linguistics, so I would like to refer back uh, to the well-known Sapir-Whorfian hypothesis that states that the grammatical and more verbal structure of person's language influences how they perceive the world. So here's the point, that the world around us, we see that the society, the culture, the people, our relations, our politics, our economics, everything, we see that even the physical realities. So we see that all of them, they are being shaped out by the language. So that's very important point, and so you can say that it is a start of the perception and how we are conceptualizing the world around us. So we see that actually it is language that influences our perceptions of the world. So every language, and language is also influenced by the ecology where the language uh, is developed, and we see that this language actually shapes up our thinking and our perception of the world. You know that in that world we have the physical realities, we have the metaphysical realities, we have the cultural realities. So all of these realities actually that they are being influenced by the language. So this is a very important point from where we are going to understand the concept of the cultural linguistics or the ethno-linguistics. That and We see that in different cultures, so we have different languages, and now at present we have more than 7,000 languages, and out of these 7,000 languages, only 600 languages which are considered in the category of the safe languages, so which are not having problem. Otherwise, all the languages they are in danger. So based on this hypothesis, we see that the concept of the linguistic determinism that appears mean to say that we are bound to see what our language presents us to see. So language may determine our thinking patterns, the way we view and think about the world. So that's very important because it is our language that is delimiting our perception about the world. So mean to say that the ideas, that only we are the human being that we have the core ability to speak, and no other animal, no other creature in the world that does have this ability. So we see that in our ideas and our concept, they are actually determined by the language. So language that delimits or determines our perception of the world. Our language does exert great influence on patterns of thinking and therefore on culture. Language may reinforce certain ideas and push them into the attention. So earlier we know that one concept is that language is a tool of communication. Mean to say that just like we have other tools of communication, for example, that my dress, the way I sit, my postures, the colors I am choosing, my hairstyle, even so all of them they are communicating, or they are working as a tool of communication, and language is one of them. But it's not so that. So mean to say that when we say that language is a tool of communication, it means that we are accepting that already ideas they are present, the perceptions are present in our mind, and language is simply communicating. Language is simply being used as a tool to communicate these perceptions. But in the modern world, we know that it's not the situation because language it's one of the functions of language. Yes, the language does perform the role of a tool as a tool of communication, but it's not the only role of language. So language not only communicates the idea, but language actually creates these ideas. But language actually constructs these ideas. So this is a very important role that language not only constructs but also shapes these ideas. That language not only communicates but also constructs and shapes our ideas. So it means that ideas are nothing than the expression of our grammatical and lexical choices. So it's very important point that mean to say that, and then we have then how we describe the world. We describe the world with our language because we don't have any other medium of describing the world and perceiving the world. So only language is there. So it is language that actually helps us in describing the world, uh, that limit us, or it is a language that limit us in describing the world and in perceiving the world, because we have the only tool of describing and perceiving the world. This is our language. So language not only, now we see that language has double function. That language not only uh, works as a tool of communication to describe the world, but language is also language is actually not meant for communication. Language as is actually meant for developing our ideas, developing the system of our thinking. Language is actually meant for developing the different patterns of our thinking. So that's the important point here. And now we see that when we believe or when we say that language linguistic determinism, so the next point is this, we can see the linguistic relativity. Because when we see that we perceive the world with our language, mean to say that it depends on what language that we are using. If I'm using this language, I'm perceiving the world in a different way. And if I'm speaking other language, it means that I am perceiving the world in a different way. For example, that if I belong to the Nambia, and so I'm not able to distinguish between blue and green. But if I'm speaking English language, I'm able to distinguish between even the light blue and the dark blue color. So mean to say that what language we are using, so the same perception of the world that we'll be developing. So this is the linguistic relativity. The less similar the language, more diverse their conceptualizations of the world. Different languages view the world differently, and this is the main or the major premise of cultural linguistics and what I am going to talk with you today. The less similar the language, more diverse their conceptualizations of the world. Different languages view the world differently. There can be differences in semantic association of the concept. Encoding of life experiences in language is not exclusively accessible to everyone, but only to the members of that certain social group. Linguistic structure doesn't constrain what people think, but only influence what they routinely think. Language reflects cultural preoccupations. So here's a question. So the question is that the structure of a language affects the perception of the reality of its speakers and thus influence their thought patterns and the world views. So now we come to the point, or there's a big question. When each language has a unique system, is cross-cultural understanding impossible or possible? So this is a big question because when we belong to the different languages and when we have the different perceptions, when we have the different world views, so so definitely that the cross-cultural understanding that will create ambiguity, and ambiguity that's natural. So this is linguistic ambiguity, and linguistic ambiguity is inherent in the language. So that's what we need to understand, that if the persons they are speaking the different language, so they belong, so definitely they will develop a different culture, and their worldview is different from our worldview. So speakers show variation and differences in their access to and internalization of their community's cultural cognition. So the individual conceptualizations that develops the cultural cognition, and the cultural cognition of the individuals, so they make the community's cultural cognition. Also, cultural cognition is dynamic in that it is constantly being negotiated and renegotiated across generations and through contact between speech communities. Yes, so this cultural cognition is not something permanent, so that remains in flux, that remains changing with the passage of the time, with the intermixing, with the intercultural dialogue, with the cross-cultural dialogue, and through the generations. So that continues changing. So many aspects of speech communities language are shaped by elements of cultural cognition that have prevailed at different stages in the history of that community and that have left traces in subsequent linguistic practice. As you know that the individuals they do have their history, their past. Similarly, we know that the communities and the cultures they have their history and the past. And whatever the main events that they have passed there in their history, so that's a part of their collective memories. Now come to the idea of the cultural conceptualizations. So that how we are conceptualizing the world based on our language. So cultural conceptualizations are conceptual structures such as schemas, categories, and metaphors that come into existence as a result of interactions between members of a cultural group. So when the members of the group they interact, they communicate with each other, they develop the cultural conceptualization. So their viewpoint or their perception, how they are viewing, how they are conceptualizing the culture. And cultural linguistics offers both a theoretical and analytical framework for investigating the cultural conceptualization that underlie the use of human language. And these cultural conceptualizations, they are based and rooted on our language. We need to say that our language, now you can understand, it is our linguistic structure, the grammatical, lexical structures, grammatical, lexical, pragmatic structures, or it is the morphological, grammatical, lexical, and pragmatic structures which develop our which create our language, and our language that develop our cultural conceptualization, and our cultural conceptualization that develop the cultural cognition. And that's why we see that all of them, they are based on the language. And already we have discussed that language is unique, language is different, language presents a different worldview to its speakers. So now you can understand that why the people of the different culture, they do have their different cultural conceptualization and their different cultural cognitions. So apart from the cultural conceptualizations, apart from language, cultural conceptualizations may also be instantiated in various other aspects of people's life. So there are other aspects as well. For example, in the figure you can see that the cultural conceptualization, they're also influenced and shaped by the cultural art, including painting, song, the literature, including, for example, poetry, novel, the cultural event, for example, Lunar New Year, Valentine's Day, the rituals, for example, cultural dance, cultural ceremonies, non-verbal behavior, for example, facial gestures, and emotions, for example, pride and shame, and language. All of these factors, they combined, or they are inclusive in developing and making our cultural conceptualizations. Now we need to understand further that what are the cultural conceptualizations, and in the second part of my discussion, so I would like to explain so what are the cultural conceptualizations, and how they are shaped and how they are formed. So in the cultural conceptualization, we see that three elements are there: cultural schemas, cultural categories, and cultural metaphors. So in the cultural schemas, they're very important, the schemas and sub-schemas. So the overall worldview, the overall thinking patterns, the overall approach of looking at something, and the fixed patterns. So cultural schemas are usually the fixed patterns of thinking. So cultural schemas capture beliefs, norms, rules, and expectations of behavior, as well as values relating to various aspects and components of the experience. For example, that a scary thing schema, for example, it enables Aboriginal English speakers to allude to the activity of powers beyond their control, which may affect their lives. So, in their scary schema, scary thing include what non-Aboriginal people refer to as supernatural. So, for example, that this is a cultural schema that we develop the different schemas, we develop the different belief schemas, we develop the different norms and value schemas, and then we attach the fear with them, we attach the scariness with them. So, and this is the cultural conceptualization, how we are looking at something. For example, that if we disobey the supernatural power, so you will be ruined, you will be crushed, or you will be punished, or you are a sinner. So this is the cultural conceptualization of viewing at the various phenomena of the world. And we see that with the different degrees and with the different intensities, we see that these cultural conceptualizations are shared by each and every member of the community. So another constituent element of the cultural conceptualization is the cultural categories and subcategories. So these are those culturally constructed conceptual categories, for example, including the colors, emotions, attributes, foodstuffs, kinship terms, events that are primarily reflected in the lexicon of human language. So the lexical vocabulary, so that is based on these cultural categories, and these concepts they vary from individual to individual. An example of cultural category in Aboriginal English is clever, used among other things to mean spiritually powerful. So, how we are looking at the uh, uh, different realities, different colors, different attributes, different emotions, different foodstuffs, different kinship terms. For example, at food items, we see that how the different cultures and how the different that, for example, that how an animal is being portrayed in a language. You see that that will develop an idea or the perception of that animal. Now that we'll see that or how a language is developing how a language is presenting the concept of a food item. So this food item is halal or haram or right or wrong or healthy or unhealthy. So you see that we start looking at the world, we start looking at this item from this conceptualization, from the negative perspective or from the positive perspective. So if some animal is being portrayed as negative and as bad in some language, so the speaker of that community will be looking at very negatively at this animal, and the animal's life will also be in danger. The animal will not be safe in that particular community because the speaker of that community are not presenting the animal in such a good way, or this language is not presenting. Now come to the third constituent element of the cultural metaphor. So this is the cross-domain conceptualization grounded in cultural traditions such as folk medicine, worldview, or spiritual belief system. So what metaphor system that the language is using? You can see that some animals they are being euphemized uh, because uh, because the different positive elements are attached there. For example, the lion, that is symbol of the metaphor of the bravery, moon. So and similarly we see the land or the dharti. So we have the different cultural metaphors that the language is presenting to you, and the metaphor that we hear from our childhood, they develop our worldview, they develop our perception about this cultural metaphor. An example of an Aboriginal English cultural metaphor is the earth as human being, the living earth, the motherland. So, which is embedded in the expression, we close the fire in with all the sand to heal the wound of the earth. So, this is what we see that how the earth is being portrayed. So different languages may have different conceptualizations associated with different colors. For example, that green with envy as in English and maybe a holy color associated with paradise in the Arabic spoken by Muslims. Our cultural metaphors are, for example, white lie, black sheep, black market, black humor, a green old age, red tape, etc. So you see, so these are only example that how we are viewing the different realities and how the different realities are being shaped up. Another very important point, so in the conceptualization, is that of reconceptualization. So these concepts, how they are conceptualized by the native speaking community, and how these realities they are reconceptualized by the speaker of the other linguistic communities. To reconceptualize existing cultural conceptualization process of transnational trade, colonization, and increasingly globalization. So they are giving us the opportunities to reconceptualize these realities, these social realities. For instance, the whole event category of Christmas may be conceptualized as Western celebration rather than a religious occasion because it is being reconceptualized in a very different way. Other example of reconceptualizations are provided by event categories such as Valentine's Day, for example, which grew out of the ancient Rome fertility festival of Lupercalia, Thanksgiving Day, and Halloween. In some parts of the world, including China, people may celebrate Thanksgiving Day to thank teachers and parents rather than conforming to the original earlier idea of thanking God for the blessing of the year. including harvest, as continues to be the case in the United States. So you see that how these conceptualizations are being reconceptualized very differently in the different cultures, in the different linguistics communities. So phenomena that may be referred to as cross-cultural reconceptualization. So coming to the last point, we see that understanding cross-cultural understanding, uh, cross-cultural understanding. So the two circles on the left, so you can see that the circles are three circles are there, and the two circles on the left are a depiction of the theoretical framework with cultural schemas, cultural categories, and cultural metaphor, being particular instance of cultural conceptualizations. The two circles at the bottom reflect the analytical framework with cultural schemas, cultural categories, and cultural metaphors being the analytical tool that cultural linguistics operate with. So you can see that how the cultural conceptualizations they are being operated by the linguistics or the language of the speaking community, and how these cultural conceptualization are developing the cultural cognition. So these were some point that I wanted to discuss with you, that how can you understand the cross cultural communication. Now, at the end, though, I would like to suggest some topics or the areas of interest in the cultural linguistics where we can work on. For example, that cultural learning in language education. So that's very important area of cultural linguistics. English language imperialism in Islamic world, Pakistani cultural perspective. Number three, the relationship between language and culture and the implications for language teaching. The role culture plays in learning the second language. The relationship between language, culture, and gender. Developing cultural awareness in foreign language teaching. The linguistic image of world and images, image schemas, delimitation and comparison. Cultural conceptualizations in humorous discourse, in humor discourse in English and Urdu. Pakistani English, a study of metaphors and its applications in language learning and teaching, integrating language and culture through conceptual metaphors in teaching English as foreign language, conceptual analysis of story recounts in Pakistani English writing literature, ethnographic conceptual text visual analysis, Pakistani language, diachronic synchronic conceptual analysis, Pakistani English writing literature, conceptualizations relating to Sufi life, cultural linguistics, and religion. So conceptualizations relating to sacred sites in Pakistani English, conceptualization relating to democracy in political discourse in Pakistan, cultural linguistics in political discourse, conceptualizations relating to freedom of speech in political discourse in Pakistan, conceptualizations relating to death in Muslim eulogistic idiom, cultural metaphors in world Englishes, cultural linguistics and world Englishes. So Pakistani English intercultural miscommunication, globalization, metacultural competence developing, and linguistic relativity. So these were some points, and I hope that you have enjoyed. And so this presentation will help you in understanding the concept of the conceptualizations and the cross-cultural conflict. And thank you so much of you. Thanks, audience, for listening to me. Thank you, sir.